Very good morning, and thank you all for joining us here. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Tushar Patil as well as the organizers of the 45th Icon for bringing out this very interesting and practical format. So I'm joined by a very illustrious group of panelists, including surgeons, medical oncologists, and radiation oncologists. And the expert today for our session is Dr. Hemant Tongaonkar. Dr. Tongaonkar is a senior surgical uro-oncologist who was for several years at Tata Memorial Hospital, and he is now the Chief of Surgical Oncology and Uro-Oncology at Nanavati Max Hospital. Welcome, Dr. Tongaonkar. I think Dr. Tongaonkar will be joining us via the Zoom platform. So we have a good 35 minutes, and let's just dive in. So I'll start with the case. This is a 60-year-old gentleman who was a chronic smoker on irregular treatment for hypertension, and he presented with colicky pain abdomen in the right lumbar region since about a month, dysuria since a month, intermittent episodes of frank hematuria since a month. There was no significant history of weight loss or fever. These were his initial investigations. The ultrasound showed a soft tissue lesion, which was 2.3 centimeters at the right VU junction, along with vesicle wall hypertrophy and trabeculations. The CT scan images are provided here. So you can see that there is a polypoidal mass, which is close to the right posterior lateral wall involving the right VU junction, measuring about 2.2 centimeters. Both the kidneys are normal in size and shape and exhibit prompt function. There is no perivesical invasion. There is no significant lymphadenopathy, and the liver is normal. He underwent a cystoscopy, which revealed two polypoidal growths seen near the right UV junction. The right ureteral orifice was not visualized. The left ureteroscopy was done as part of the cystoscopy. He also underwent a TURBT in the same sitting. The histopathology showed a high-grade, section A showed a high-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma with brisk areas of metastasis, of mitosis and extensive areas of necrosis. And this specimen showed an infiltration of the lamina propria. You can see the cystoscopy images on your left and the biopsy report on the right. The section B of the specimen showed unequivocal infiltration of muscularis propria seen in this biopsy. The cells express CK, CK20, P63, and GATA3. The rest of the investigations were the CBC was normal, the creatinine was 0.8, his estimated GFR was 95 ml per minute, the liver function test was normal, 2D echo showed a normal ejection fraction of 60%, and his performance status was 1. There was no significant neuropathy or hearing loss. He was diagnosed with a high-grade urothelial carcinoma of the urinary bladder, which was muscle invasive, and the clinical stage was T2N0. He was discussed in the joint clinic, and he was planned to start on neoadjuvant chemotherapy. He received 4 cycles of dose-dense MVAC chemotherapy, which was reasonably well tolerated, except for one episode of febrile neutropenia, which was low risk and managed on the OPD. His interim CT scan, which was done after 4 cycles of treatment, showed a complete regression of the bladder lesion without the appearance of any more new lesions. With this, he was planned for surgery, and this actually happened during the peak of the COVID pandemic in Mumbai. So during the workup, he was also diagnosed to have COVID pneumonia. He had a stormy course after diagnosis, required prolonged hospitalization, ventilatory support, remdesivir, steroids, and was on anticoagulants for almost 3 months. And as a result of this, it was a decision taken to defer radical cystectomy at the moment. We also discussed with him the option of considering either radical radiation or radical RT along with concurrent chemotherapy. But following the counseling, the patient refused this treatment. So I have tumor board A, and that includes surgical oncologists as well as medical oncologists, correct? Okay, so you are working in a cost-constrained setting where most of the Arogya formats and the free government schemes are available. Going by the staging that was done in this patient, is all this available at your place? Is there anything that would you do differently in a patient with suspected metastasis from the radiological workup point of view?
No, fairly well available sources as far as staging is concerned. May not offer PET scan upfront, but yes, CT scan definitely, and we'll get a chest screening. As far as the chemotherapy concerned, many times DDM-VAC dose dense, we are not able to give methotrexate best. Many times we end up giving gemcitabine plus cisplatin as a neoadjuvant chemotherapy. That is the only thing different I may be doing. Many times DDM-VAC is not. So second, what is the option given in NCCN or we routinely practice? Gemcitabine plus cisplatin as a neoadjuvant 4 cycles. That may be the only thing I may change as a cost constraints. That a lesser risk of febrile neutropenia and covered in all government scheme, as well as Maharashtra and Karnataka's concern.
My question to the surgeons, what would you prefer as the imaging in this? An MRI pelvis, CT with bone scan, or a PET CT scan?
See, first of all, Nilesh, this is muscle invasive, and I would do a CT scan or an MRI plus a bone scan. Bone scan only if she has symptoms. PET scan, we have level 2 evidence. It's not level 1 evidence. So CT scan plus a bone scan.
So contrast enhanced CT scan is an adequate staging for urothelial carcinoma. Yeah. And if patient is symptomatic, a bone scan is suffices. I'll come to the later part of the treatment in a while, but before this, what important information do you require at this point to decide what treatment the patient will take? Dr. Damne, anything with regards to biomarkers in this setting of a localized surgically excisable disease? Is there any relevance of biomarkers?
Yes, definitely there is a relevance, but at present we are not routinely doing, because even if it turns positive, the evidence for adjuvant or the affordability as per as the settings we have given as a panelist, cost constraint settings. So no, we are not routinely doing any of these markers in urothelial carcinoma.
So isn't cisplatin eligibility one of the most important criteria for deciding what modality of treatment your patient will receive?
Definitely, we have a set criteria for cisplatin, and many times in urothelial carcinoma, we end up seeing patient is ineligible for cisplatin. But however, this marker, even if turned positive and we have availability of a targeted therapy, we are not able to offer in our cost constraint setting.
Okay.
As far as the panel, we have given the options. No, I may not be doing those.
So the Golski criteria is what is used for evaluating cisplatin or platinum eligibility, which includes the performance status. So if the patient has any of these following points, he is considered ineligible for platinum. And this is not ineligible for cystectomy. This is regarding the use of platinums in these groups of patients. So that's an ECOG more than 2, impaired renal function with a creatinine clearance of less than 60, class 3 heart failure, and more than grade 2 hearing loss or neuropathy. So I'll come to the last point in this group. So what about surgical options, Dr. Tanveer and Dr. Desai?
First of all, this patient looks like stage 2, T2N0. I would give neoadjuvant first.
Would you really?
Yeah.
In real life also?
Yeah, okay. I would. And I'll send it across to you. You have been treating it. So in any way. Second thing, as far as the patient group, which we are doing in the scheme, either open or laparoscopic, both is feasible. You don't require staplers also in this. So open, if radical cystectomy, and most of the government hospitals have a laparoscopic instruments and things. So we should be able to do a laparoscopic cystectomy and then do a condi based on that.
Dr. Desai, would you like to comment?
Both open and laparoscopic radical cystectomy is good in this set of tumors. We don't have a robot for this, therefore only open and laparoscopic.
So the take-home point is that open surgery versus minimally accessible surgery, both are acceptable options in the setting that you're working in, correct? Okay, thank you. So I'll come to tumor number B. I think most of our patients would be coming to you. Now, you'll be looking after geriatric patients who have certain significant comorbidities. Cisplatin eligibility is the single most important factor deciding treatment in this setting. Am I right? So what are your challenges in geriatric practice and how do you decide treatment in this group of patients?
Morning. As you have rightly said, we generally get these types of patients who are elderly, who have a lot of comorbidities and issues. And most of the time they turn up after surgery only. We don't get, as you have rightly said, T2 disease for neoadjuvant. So giving chemotherapy in this setting is really very challenging and very difficult, because the first thing I had seen was the recovery is slightly delayed as compared to the other normal patients. So they come quite late. And second thing is the comorbidities. So selecting cisplatin becomes very difficult for us. But if things are okay, but with this geriatric diabetic hypertensive and LV ejection fraction 45, I think the cisplatin becomes very difficult. And we have very limited things to offer to this patient. Maybe single agent gemcitabine is one of the good option in such patient. And I don't know about the affordability in this.
So that's their concern. We'll discuss that later. So, so in essence, what you're trying to tell me is that this patient is platinum ineligible, right?
Yes, sure.
So how would you approach a patient who is platinum ineligible?
So sir, this patient, it is anyways T2N0. We should rather go ahead with the cystectomy. He's cisplatin ineligible. So there is no evidence to give carboplatin in place of cisplatin in such a situation. We rather go ahead directly with cystectomy or whatever the surgical plan.
Okay. So in platinum eligible patients, the valid options that you have based on the patient's clinical features include a radical cystectomy with pelvic nodal dissection, concurrent radiotherapy with chemotherapy in certain subgroup of patients, neoadjuvant chemotherapy with NVAC and gemcitabine cisplatin in the dose-dense or the conventional form. And there is still in studies, but you have neoadjuvant checkpoint inhibitors with chemotherapy. And in platinum ineligible patients, which is actually 50 to 60% of your patient population, radical cystectomy and pelvic node dissection is the treatment of choice. So would you offer cystectomy? What would you offer to a patient who is not fit for cystectomy also?
So such patients, obviously, who are going to have these comorbidities which are preventing use of cisplatin, also have those comorbidities which are going to affect the surgical recovery and overall morbidity post-surgery. Radical cystectomy, even though we are saying it very easily, is a morbid surgery, of course, and the recovery from that is also prolonged, especially in an elderly patient. The challenges that we face here are going to be fitness for anesthesia or the perioperative outcomes. The second thing that we face is also the family, are they really ready to subject their elderly relative to a major surgery? And most of these patients, we have noticed that they are not willing for any radical treatment for their patients. They do back out when they say that this surgery is going to be so much and it's going to have this much morbidity. Most of the relatives also are not willing to subject their grandfather or someone for a surgery like this.
Fair enough. So no surgery, no NACT. What else?
Right. So, I mean, I'm not saying no surgery. I would evaluate definitely and give it a good try to see whether this patient is eligible for surgery. And if possible, yes, offer it. If not, and the factors are not willing for surgery, then radical RT does remain another option after a maximal TURBT, if that can be done under anesthesia.
Any specific challenge with radical RT in an elderly population? There is no head-to-head comparison with surgery, but in practice, what are the challenges you face?
So cystitis, I mean, very bad cystitis is what we encounter. Patients are already having some amount of prostatic hyperplasia. They develop even worse urinary symptoms. These patients do poorly in terms of urinary frequency, urgency. These kind of symptoms do come up. Other than that, I wouldn't say that there's any other added morbidity to radical RT, but yes.
So the quality of life,
post
radiation with the urgency and all those symptoms. Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you so much. And coming to the groups, that is tumor board C, you have a very affording patient. The sky is the limit, staying alone. So he's got his sons and children in the US, sons and daughters, and they've been calling you and asking you about immunotherapy, targeted therapy, antibody drug conjugates. Is this a scenario for doing biomarker testing in this group of patients? Uma, this is your day-to-day practice in Fortis.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So definitely, I mean, in the upfront setting, I would not really recommend any of these markers. There's no enough data to tell me to do these markers and base my treatment based on these markers. So this is not what I would do upfront. I would go with the conventional treatment. The patient is fit to do counsel for neoadjuvant chemo and then followed by surgery.
Ghanshyam?
Yeah, if cisplatin ineligible, so definitely they are a candidate for neoadjuvant immunotherapy. Otherwise, if they are a platinum eligibility, definitely gemcitabine and platinum for 4 cycles.
Okay.
As a radiation oncologist, I would present this patient in our tumor board. And what I would discuss is, I'll discuss the criteria with the urologist. What were the findings on cystoscopy? So they said there were 2 tumors. And what were the size of tumors? What was the exact location? And then decide whether this patient is a candidate for radical chemo-RT. If this patient is a candidate for radical chemo-RT, because according to me, the results of radical chemo-RT, there is no comparison between surgery and radical chemo-RT, but the results of radical chemo-RT in selected patients is as good as that with the surgery. So if patient is eligible, then both the options should be presented to the patient, and accordingly, the treatment should be taken into account.
So point well taken, Dr. Pushkar. Having said that, I think in this patient, there are really no contraindications to surgery. I'll request Dr. Fahim to tell me about that.
Yeah, I think surgery should be the first treatment if it is fit. And even at the age of 70 or more than 70, if he's fit, is cardiac wise and protein wise, if he's fit, I think surgery is the easiest way to do. If otherwise there are no, like ejection fraction is very less.
No, so this is not that group of patient. That was only for tumor B. This is a young, fit patient without significant comorbidities, except a social issue about not having relatives. He has no financial constraints and is platinum eligible.
Regarding immunotherapy, I think neoadjuvant CT and followed by surgery should be the treatment.
Okay, so why are patients not considered for NACT in the real world scenario? Is there an issue regarding efficacy? So we have these 5 trials which have clearly proven the role, the advantage, and the benefit with regards to neoadjuvant chemotherapy in bladder cancer. In addition to improving the overall survival, there is a significant improvement in the pathological response, obviously, in the tune of about 30%, because the other arm is going upfront for surgery. So the initial regimens used were cisplatin, adriamycin, cisplatin, methotrexate, but some of the latest protocols, which is the dose-dense MVAC, have shown a very high pathological response. And the meta-analysis has also shown that there is a 5% survival advantage in those patients who receive neoadjuvant chemotherapy before surgery for patients who have muscle-invasive disease. Bear in mind, we are not talking about T1 or TIS disease. And also, the NCCN guidelines do reflect exactly what we have discussed right now, that in patients who've got muscle-invasive disease, in a fit patient who is eligible for cisplatin, NACT is the way to go, followed by surgery, and then later treatment considerations. So that again makes me wonder why in real life practice, the number of patients who actually come or are referred for NACT is less than 10%. It must be more related to practical issues rather than anything else. And Dr. Pushkar brought up a very important point about discussing this case in a multidisciplinary clinic. I think that is where the finer nuances of treatment and the benefits and disadvantages of different treatment can be discussed. Now, this is a patient who has come to you for surgery, radical cystectomy, open versus robotic. Dr. Fahim, finance is not the issue. Any distinct advantages of doing robotic surgery or any disadvantages?
No, I think if patient is affording, preferably robotic surgery.
Preferably robotic surgery. Okay. from the point of early post-operative recovery, lesser morbidity.
Correct.
No difference or improvement in the results of surgery. Am I right?
Right.
Okay. I'll come back to Dr. Uma. This patient is very keen to receive neoadjuvant immunotherapy because of some exciting data that has been presented. We know that the PURE-1 study, which evaluated the role of pembrolizumab in this setting, showed an excellent pathological CR rates, especially in those patients who had a CPS of more than 5. If this patient had a CPS of more than 10, would you consider it? There is also a lot of exciting combinations of immunotherapy with platinums in platinum-eligible neoadjuvant setting, as well as targeted with immunotherapy in several of the platinum-ineligible groups. So very exciting data, not yet proven. Patient is very keen, lot of calls to you. Please consider neoadjuvant immunotherapy. How convinced are you with neoadjuvant immunochemotherapy in bladder cancer?
The data is really exciting, like you said, but I think we would need a phase 3 level 1 evidence before I bring it into my practice, and I would try to counsel this patient regarding that this is still very experimental and we don't have hardcore data. If he insists, however, then I would like, probably take a consent that, this is what he wants and, knowing that this is experimental, only then go ahead with it. But I wouldn't push it.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to request our expert, Dr. Tongaonkar, to comment on our discussions right now. Can we get connected to Dr. Tongaonkar?
Yes. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. Thanks, Nilesh. I think all the three groups discussed their specific clinical situations very well, but there are certain issues which I would like to comment on. First of all, as far as the staging is concerned, they're right that we should do a CT of the abdomen, pelvis, and chest, and PET is not routinely necessary. The cisplatin eligibility, I think, is the most important point because we know the standard of care today is neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by surgery, and it's imperative for us to assess the cisplatin eligibility. This is especially for the surgeons. Okay. As far as the feasibility of DD-MVAC, I think most of the times we should use DD-MVAC or MVAC-CMV because there is a level 1 evidence of that. Gemcitabine cisplatin is very often used, but there's no head-to-head comparison, there's no RCT data regarding gemcitabine cisplatin. Now, treatment options, people said about neoadjuvant chemotherapy, why is it not being used? If you look at the real-world data, only 19% of eligible patients all over the world receive neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And the two main reasons for that, one is because there is a fear that if the patient progresses during chemotherapy, then the patient will have lost the opportunity of a surgery. Well, this doesn't really happen. If you assess the patient after 2 cycles, that should not be a problem. And secondly, the fear in the minds of surgeons that because of chemotherapy, the morbidity of surgery will be more. Again, there is no evidence to suggest that the post-chemo surgery is more morbid. As far as the approach to surgery is concerned, everybody very easily said robotic is the best. Well, there is no evidence to suggest that to date. Open surgery is still the standard of care. So bladder is a very unforgiving disease. If there is a local relapse, it would mean a certain death. So in selected patients you can do, but there is evidence from all over the world that there is a tendency to underuse neobladders whenever you are doing a minimal access surgery. This particular patient, in my opinion, is is the right person to have a neobladder. So just because you want to do a minimal access, you should not give him an ileal conduit instead of a neobladder. Well, as far as the second scenario, the geriatric patient is concerned, I don't think, age is of a limited relevance actually, and it is an evaluation of the comorbidities that probably provides us a better indicator of life expectancy. We don't routinely use this Charlson comorbidity index or a comprehensive geriatric assessment, but we should be doing that more often. Yeah, and basically, if the patient is not fit for any kind of chemotherapy, then radical cystectomy becomes the choice of treatment. As far as the radiation therapy is concerned, I think this patient is exquisitely suitable to have a radiation plus chemo for a bladder preservation. Of course, cystectomy still is the standard of care, but if the patient is not suitable, not eligible for a cystectomy because of the comorbidities, chemoradiation would provide an excellent alternative in this particular patient. If you use the adaptive radiation therapy, plan of the day radiation therapy, the morbidity is extremely low and more than 70% can have a bladder preservation. As far as the neoadjuvant checkpoint inhibitors is concerned, yes, the data is absolutely exciting. And I hope in future we get more and more neoadjuvant approaches that would probably improve the survival. Well, surgery has reached its limit. And we know that only with surgery, maybe 50-60% of the patient may be cured. But if you want to go further than that, we need more perioperative systemic therapy that's effective. Lastly, a word about the actual survival benefit with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. It's not 5% anymore. If you look at the most recent meta-analysis of more than 2,000 patients, it is actually 8% at 5 years. And this is a huge benefit. I think in very few cancers we get a benefit like this. So I think neoadjuvant chemotherapy should be used more often. There's always a fear that if you send it for chemotherapy, the patient may not come back to you. One of your colleagues will do the cystectomy and then you will lose out on the patient. But I think you've got to take that chance for the benefit of the patient. I think I congratulate all three teams for an excellent discussion and Nilesh for an excellent moderation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your valuable insights. Can we go back to the slides, please? So this patient did not take any. So yes, sir. So could you please take the mic?
There are big stalwarts in geo here, right? And the expert presented. But in my thought, if you see the first slide of yours, there was a lesion which was at the UV junction. Will it make that difference in deciding a local treatment? You know, surgery or robotic and radiation. If there is a stricture, there is a likelihood of a hydronephrosis out there. So is it going to make a difference to our surgical colleague or a radiation oncology colleague? I just wanted to understand that.
Dr. Tanveer, would you like to comment on that?
Valid point, sir. If you subject these patients to radical chemoradiations, then you may have a stricture which it will end up in a hydronephrosis and subsequently the effects of a non-functioning kidney that side. So after a neoadjuvant protocol, I would subject this patient to surgery itself.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll just continue with our case. This patient was finally did not take any definitive treatment for the local disease because of these circumstances. He presented 9 months later with recurrent symptoms and pain in the left hip. An ultrasound showed a recurrent bladder lesion in the same area. Performance status was good. There were no major comorbidities. Creatinine was 0.9. And as you can see, the images, the recurrent bladder growth, the bone metastasis, and multiple retroperitoneal lymph nodes, making it an M1 status. Treatment options were discussed, and since he continued to remain platinum eligible, he received gemcitabine and cisplatin for 6 cycles. Last 2 cycles, he required dose reduction because of prolonged myelosuppression. The repeat CT scan showed partial radiological response and complete metabolic response. There were different further options to be considered because we knew that this patient had initially not received the appropriate treatment. We discussed observation as well as maintenance, and we kept him under observation as per his treatment plan of treatment. The option of maintenance in this setting has been very well discussed by Dr. Tushar Patil in the first session today. There were several which have been investigated: sunitinib, lapatinib, and one of the microtubule inhibitors, vinflunine, have been evaluated without much response. Whereas there has been an emerging role of the checkpoint inhibitors in this setting. I'll skip this slide in the interest of time. So we know that pembrolizumab did show an improvement in the DFS, but not in the OS. This was a phase 2 trial. And we know the Javelin Bladder 100 study, where the use of avelumab as a maintenance therapy in any patient who's undergone initial treatment and has achieved a PR, stable disease, or a CR, was randomized to receive avelumab versus observation, a significant improvement in the PFS as well as the OS. And this was in all comers, irrespective of whether PD-L1 is expressed or not expressed. So this is a common question to all the tumor boards. Let's start with tumor board A. In this patient, first line platinum eligible, what are your choice of treatments?
As I discussed, definitely carboplatin has shown inferior to cisplatin in urothelial carcinoma. So choice for platinum eligible will be gemcitabine plus cisplatin.
Okay. What about patients who are platinum ineligible in this setting?
As affordability, if it's an issue, then...
So in your setting, that's correct.
Okay. In my setting, definitely. So we'll discuss about the gemcitabine carboplatin. Definitely we'll discuss with the patient and relative. It will be an inferior result. But given the setting, yes, that will be the option, gemcitabine carboplatin.
Thank you. Tumor B, where you have patients geriatric with comorbidities. Sushil, importance of biomarkers in this setting, what treatment options? I would assume that you're talking of patients who are platinum ineligible.
Yeah, with this platinum ineligible PD-L1, if the cost is not an issue, we have cost for like... No, in my practice, it becomes very difficult to give anything like immunotherapy. But having said this, with this scenario, if it's a strong PD-L1 positive more than 10, definitely pembrolizumab will be the better option for my patient with diabetic, hypertensive, and other things.
Okay, anybody in
platinum ineligible?
Common opinion from tumor B, any additional comments? Let's go to board C. Finance is not the issue. Young, fit patient with a social restriction.
Yeah, so once we finish with few cycles of platinum.
So I'll first come to the biomarkers. What biomarkers would you like to do in this setting?
So at least a CPS scoring. And if it is higher, more than 10%. So after 3 to 4 cycles of gemcitabine, and then we follow up with avelumab maintenance.
So you are convinced that avelumab makes
Absolutely.
a difference in this setting. Uma, any change in opinion? Why not pembrolizumab?
Because the data for avelumab is really good, like you showed in the Javelin study. So yeah, I would go for gemcis followed by avelumab maintenance in the first line setting who are platinum eligible.
Okay, thank you. So I think NCCN seems to agree with tumor board C in all settings. So it is chemotherapy and followed by maintenance. In platinum eligible patients, it is a platinum based chemotherapy followed by avelumab or pembrolizumab. In those patients who are platinum ineligible, you have the option of using carboplatin, though not equivalent or though not as good as cisplatin. And there is also data for using atezolizumab as well as pembrolizumab for those patients in first line setting if their patients are cisplatin ineligible. So he did not receive any switch maintenance. Finance was the issue. He was kept under observation and regular follow-up. He presented 4 months later with persistent cough and pain in the right chest and lower back. The PET scan showed a right lung metastasis with skeletal metastasis to lumbar vertebrae. The performance status remains 1. Creatinine clearance is 65 ml per minute. He had hypercalcemia. The serum calcium was 11.5. And the biomarker done showed a CPS score of 5%. So again, a common question to all the 3 tumor boards. Tumor board A, in your setting, what would be the different treatment options?
So cytotoxic chemotherapy, as we use gemcitabine cisplatin in first line setting, we'll be offering something like taxane-based chemotherapy because he is in the metastatic setting already exposed to gemcitabine cisplatin. We're going with something like taxane-based chemotherapy, either a single agent, because in second line there is no good data for a doublet. So we'll be offering single agent taxane.
What about what percentage of a patient go for supportive care?
Out of 10, I would say 6 would opt for supportive care and only 4 will take the cytotoxic single agent in second line setting.
Thank you. Tumor B, anything different? Tumor C, I'm short on time, so we'll have to just rush through this.
analyzing for FGFR mutations would be offered to this patient, though I am not sure about the availability of erdafitinib because I was trying to get it for a patient and I couldn't. And of course, the CPS being 5% here, I would probably go for a combination of chemo with pembro and then put on pembro maintenance. That would be my thing.
Okay, how do you, Dr. Biswas, any comments on this slide? Withdrawal of approval for checkpoint inhibitors?
Yeah, in the recent past, so there have been withdrawal for many such drugs, including durvalumab. So definitely those patients for second line, so my patient is applauding, so at least maybe a single agent immunotherapy would also do.
So you're not convinced with accelerated FDA approval for drugs based on response rate and overall responses?
No. So we have seen at least now 5 withdrawals in last 1 year.
Okay. Thank you. I think that will be my last question. There are several newer agents, including the FGFR inhibitors as well as the antibody drug conjugates. Our patient received palliative radiation. Zoledronic acid was started on pembrolizumab in spite of the CPS being 5% only. Post 3 cycles, he has got good response, and he's now continued on the same treatment with no significant immune-related side effects. Once again, thank you, my panelists, and thank you to Dr. Tongaonkar for being the expert for this session. Thanks again.
Thank you.